All right. Another claim made by Liberal Dream folks regarding why they think that the market is a good thing is they want to argue that capitalism makes you free. Capitalism is a source of freedom or an engine of freedom. And they're going to make this argument by claiming that economic freedom is political freedom just in a different guise. Or another way of saying this is that economic freedom is a subset of political freedom. Or another way of saying this is that consumer sovereignty, that's the consumer sov there, equals political sovereignty. Whether it's freedom of choice in terms of which brand of orange juice I want to buy, as opposed to which person I want to vote for, or which political party I want to vote for, these folks want to say it's the same thing. These are both exercises in personal freedom, and they want to maximize personal freedom both in the economic realm and in the political realm. Now, historically, there were people who argued, and these were largely people who were more influenced by Marx, who would argue that we want to preserve political freedom, but it's okay to curtail economic freedom in some ways because that's going to allow for people to live better, more equitable lives. So they wanted to say that you could curtail economic freedom but preserve political freedom. And the liberal dream folks are having none of this. They want to say this is the same thing. So if you limit one, you necessarily limit the other. And by limiting one, you're opening the door then to limiting the other one as well. So if we start encroaching on economic freedoms, that means we're also encroaching upon political freedoms. And this is where the comic book reading that you had of Hayek comes in. So the liberal dream folks want to argue that when the government interferes in economic matters, either by, say, setting the minimum wage or having other stipulations on, say, what you can and cannot trade, that is inherently a loss of freedom. You're taking away someone's freedom by having government interference in the economy. And if the regulation of the economy is pretty extensive, that opens the door then for planning, or again, government interference in the economy. It opens the door to tyranny, where the government can control everything that you do, and all your personal freedoms have been stripped away. So why do folks like Hayek, why are they so worried about government interference in economic matters? And why do they think that if you open the door to the regulation of economic things, that political freedom could be taken away? They're going to argue that political power is backed up by coercion. Laws are generally backed up either by jails or guns or a combination of the two. And so if the government was run, if the economy was run by the government, in theory, if you run afoul of what you were expected to do, you could be jailed, imprisoned, or shot. And the way to make sense of this argument is that think about how the military operates. Now, in the U.S., right, you can voluntarily choose to join the military. But once you're in the military, right, the military, which is run by the government, gives you orders. And whether you follow that order or not really isn't a matter of choice or preference. You either follow the orders, or you get sent to jail, or you could potentially get executed. Right? So if I'm in the army and I'm given an order to attack an enemy position, and instead I run away, right, from battle, that's desertion. And desertion carries with it at least a jail term, if not being shot or executed in some manner. And Hayek's fear, and people like this in the libertarian perspective, fear that all economic matters would be controlled by the government in the same way in which they control military affairs. And once that happens, people do lose all their personal freedom, and they either have to live with what the government tells them to do or face really severe consequences. Now, to be fair, the government does a lot of things and interacts with a lot of people and contracts with a lot of businesses in ways that are not run the same way as the military is. So there are lots of government contractors out there, right, who perform certain services for the government. But if they don't live up to their contract, or they're supposed to supply, say, the government with 1,000 goods, but they only are able to ship 750 of them, those people aren't going to go to jail. They're not going to be shot. They're just going to lose their contract. So the economic ties, many of the economic ties that the government has to businesses, more or less correspond to economic transactions between two businesses. But in theory, at least, these economic matters could be operated and constructed in such a way that they would resemble the model seen in the military. All right. Now, to be fair to Hayek, Hayek is writing his book. Let me step back and explain a little bit about Hayek's perspective. So Hayek lived through World War II, and he wrote his most famous book called The Road to Serfdom in, I believe, the 1950s, so in the wake of World War II, after the Nazis have been defeated and we see the rise of the Soviet Union. And Hayek writes this book, The Road to Serfdom, and it becomes pretty popular at the time, and very famous at the time. And so what someone did is they took kind of Hayek's general argument and then translated into kind of comic book form. And that's what you ended up reading for today. It charts Hayek's general argument and highlights his fears about government interference in the economy. Now, when Hayek is writing his book, he sees what's going on in the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, for a variety of reasons, did take over many economic matters and tended to operate them in a way analogous to how the military is structured, in that the Soviet Union would have a central planning board. They would decide how many cars were going to be produced a particular year, how many refrigerators were going to be produced, how much iron ore needed to be extracted, how many trees that we need to cut down for lumber. Some government agencies tried to centrally plan all aspects of the Soviet government. And which meant that, again, there's a high level of government coercion or government control of economic matters. And part of that entailed, in many cases, the government told you what your job was, and whether you wanted to have a particular job or not didn't matter. They kind of said, like, you're going to be a worker in this factory, or we need you over here, and we move over there. So personal liberty was pretty undermined in the Soviet system. Then on top of that, the Soviet Union was very paranoid, and they assumed that any problems that someone ran into or any problems that a business ran into was the result of either espionage or sabotage. And what would happen is that the Soviet Union would set unrealistic expectations. This year we're going to produce 10 million cars, all right? Some number which there was no way possible, given their facilities, and their state of technology that they could fulfill. And when businesses fell short of this unrealistic goal, it was assumed that someone or a group of people purposely sabotaged the operations. And so people who failed to do their jobs well enough could end up in jail or could end up being shot. So Hayek is seeing a very real concern. This isn't just something theoretical he's coming up with. He's seeing real world examples of his fear manifest themselves in the Soviet Union. Now the question is any time that the government interferes with the economy, does it always trend in the directions of the Soviet Union, or are there some other models out there that can also support personal freedom and have some degree of economic freedom as well? Hayek probably wouldn't be a fan of Scandinavian countries because they do have a lot of government interference in the market. But at the same time, they do also have a lot of political freedom. So their economic freedom is curtailed in some significant ways. There's a certain minimum wage that you have to pay workers. They're entitled to a certain amount of vacation per year. Those are things that you just couldn't, you don't have the freedom to decide in economic relationships, but they're also very democratic systems. So maybe there's not just this one path, this one road that ends up in serfdom, but it at least is a possibility that countries could go down. What we'll do now is we're going to see kind of a humorous example of this in the context of the US. This is going to be a humorous take on this issue, but it does outline and highlight the concerns that Hayek has and puts forward.